A Catholic marriage is as much a vocation as being a deacon, a priest. It is truly a vocation. But I agree with you. That's not where most of us are day to day. Also, you're right. Anybody that has talked to me knows that I think that life is messy, and I think it is a challenge for us to try to take. It's very easy when you go to church and you're listening to scripture and you hear all of these different things. It's very easy to go, well, that happened centuries ago. How does that apply to me? I'm having trouble getting the kids to school. My aging parents need more care. I have struggles in my marriage, and I think those things sometimes it needs a translator, if you will, or some way to unpack it so that people can more easily and readily understand it and go, oh yeah, okay, I see that. Marriage is a good example, right? I think very few people would argue with you that we live in an age of drama, we live in an age of marketing, we live in an age of branding, right? So one of the examples that I use when I talk to people is I say, well, in a day and age when many people view marriage as dressing up as ketchup and mustard, and then being married by Elvis Presley, what does that have to do with me as a Catholic? And honestly, it's about as far as from Catholicism as you could possibly be. The uniqueness of marriage in the Catholic Church is that it's a point in time when a man and a woman come together, and it's one of the few sacraments where the presider takes a lesser role. When you go to a Catholic wedding, if you pay attention the next time, most presiders put the couple forward and center on the altar. The reason for that is because for us, marriage is a very sacred thing, and that you're expressing a covenant to God as a parent, as a couple. You need to take time and think about that a little bit. I mean, it's easy to say, but you are witnessing your love before God. It's a commitment to God in a very strong way. Holy orders is where a man, dedicates his life to God, and marriage is where a couple honestly dedicates their lives before God to each other. With the idea that they're going to live a life as Catholics, they're going to raise their children as Catholics, they're going to live a life of faith. And living a life of faith, especially in this day and age, is not an easy thing to do, as you well know. The church views marriage as a very special thing. It's not something that we jump into very lightly. For Catholics, they have to go through a period of what I would call discernment. They meet with their priest or their deacon. There's kind of some steps that we walk through. There's the opportunity for what we call pre-cana. Pre-cana it takes a couple of different forms, but it's basically a process that you walk through to make sure that you've fully discerned that this is the right person. It helps you to prepare for all of those challenges that will come before you. So, not to be, a negative Nancy, but the ceremony is wonderful. It's spiritually uplifting, and then we go to the hall or to a reception area, and we have a wonderful party and all that kind of stuff. The reality is if you think about it, that is the absolute smallest part of your marriage, right? You're going to hopefully be married for a very long time. You and your wife are going to encounter illness. You're going to encounter struggles with raising your children. You're going to encounter struggles with taking care of your parents. The list goes on and on. So it's your faith and that faith journey and the graces of that sacrament that kind of serve to kind of keep you together and help you keep it all together, moving forward, so that you can not only take care of all those other people that are in your life, but take care of yourself. Well, I'm always going to tell you should go to mass together. So that would probably be first and foremost. But you hear a lot of couples talk about date night, right? That's a that's a wonderful thing. Just try to stop some of the noise, and that in its own way is working on your marriage and maintaining that structure and that focus, if you will, in your marriage. I think I would encourage people to do the same thing, except look at it from a spiritual context. So going to mass together, praying the rosary at home, that's an opportunity to incorporate your children, your whole family into prayer. So I think first off, you have to set aside time. You both have to be on the same page that prayer is important. I think there's two parts there. To me, that's kind of a two-part question. Whether you're going to pray the rosary as a family or whether you're going to pray the rosary as a couple. If you're going to pray the rosary as a couple, I think it's about setting that time aside. Do the absolute best that you can to keep from being, interrupted during that period. And I think that's probably a huge challenge, especially if you have children. I'm a big proponent of the family rosary. I think you come together as a family. I would say for the most part that, we're talking about 20, 25 minutes to pray the rosary. And there's some really good opportunities to pray the rosary as a family from the perspective of they make really big rosaries. So you and your family can sit however that works in the family room. Mom and dad sitting in his chair, mom's sitting on the couch, and the kids are on the floor. But the kids can see the beads, they can hear the prayers, the rosaries. They come in a variety of different sizes. Some are huge, but there's some that are bigger than a regular rosary. And it helps to teach the kids the faith because we cover those base prayers of Catholicism. There's a special charism there, if you will, with the Blessed Mother that I think moms particularly feel a closeness to. That kind of builds that family unit, that domestic church that's so very important and, quite honestly missing a lot in society today. Well, and it shows mom and dad have a commitment to each other and their faith, and then it pushes that faith out to the children. It sets up for good habits, and it shows that it's important. 25 minutes may or may not seem like a very long time, but in the overall scope of a day, a week, however they decide to do it, what's 25 minutes? I think that you have to work at marriage. Marriage isn't something that just happens, right? I always like to hear when people say that, well, my marriage is very clearly delineated, and 50% of the time I do this, and 50% of the time I do that. I can tell you it doesn't work that way for me. Marriage is 150% commitment, 24 hours a day. There's days that you, as a spouse, are going to fall short, and you're going to hit a rough patch, and your spouse is going to be the one that supports you and loves you through that process, regardless of how right, wrong, illogical you might be being. There's no number of hours, minutes. It doesn't fit into a box. The fact is that you're committed to that person, and you keep outpouring that love. And hopefully when your time comes, or on a day-to-day basis, you feel that outpouring of love as well. Marriage is work. There's no doubt about that. The church does recognize that not all marriages work out. I think married couples all go through rough patches where they may call into question their vocation. I say it that way because marriage truly is a vocation. You brought up the parallels between holy orders and matrimony as sacraments. A Catholic marriage is as much a vocation as being a deacon, a priest. It is truly a vocation. I think that's something that people miss out on a little bit. As you will have struggles in that vocation, and I certainly always, if you're hitting a rough spot, certainly you can always reach out to a priest or a deacon. Priests and deacons are willing to work through that spiritual component, but I think there's also the opportunity there. I wouldn't jump directly to divorce because of whatever the issue is. I always encourage people to reach out to the priest and deacon so that we can help with the spiritual component. But there's also a lot of advantage to marriage counseling. There's actually counseling now available that's certified counselors, people with a level of expertise in that area that also have a strong knowledge and understanding of how your faith interweaves with that. I think you need to, like I said, marriage is work. You have to kind of slow down, you have to stop, you have to recognize you got a problem, and then work through that problem. You should discern about the divorce as much as you should discern about the marriage. You don't want to make a decision. You don't want to make a decision that's going to affect you, the whole rest of your life, in actuality, based on a single action, a feeling that maybe you haven't validated. It shouldn't be a spur of the moment decision. Now, having said that, because I deal with a lot of couples, and the church has no expectation that you should endure something that is either physically harming to you, or the church doesn't expect people to maintain abusive relationships because the sacrament is so important or the bond is so important. I mean, there are situations where the church recognizes that although you entered into that, we call it a bond, when you enter into that bond with all the good faith, expecting that it's going to work out and it's going to be wonderful, that's not always the case. And that's a process where we, on the pastoral side of things, walk you through the process of receiving an annulment.